Hey, my dear friends, Mano Ilya here. You're listening to or watching The Study of Stuff. And of course, you already know that because it says it right there. Anyways, this interview was an amazing one. I really had a great conversation with the fine gentlemen at Synaxis Podcast. Both Josh and Jordan are extremely knowledgeable guys. We covered a lot of ground. We jumped all over the place. We discussed perennialism. We discussed Gnosticism. We discussed New Age deception, UFOs, Father Seraphim rose. What else did we talk about? Music and the occult. And of course, we did it all from the perspective of three gentlemen that are Orthodox Christians. If you like this content, please like and subscribe and all that business. I got a lot of stuff coming up soon, and I hate asking that. Just do it, man. Hit those things. Anyways, if you don't know about Synaxis Podcast, you're about to find out a lot more about them, and you got to check them out. The link's in the description. It's an amazing podcast. I keep saying it over and over again in the interview, and I really mean it. One of my favorites. Check out Synaxis Podcast. Here we go. Word to Big Bird and Jing Jang and a Wing Wang. All right, and we are live, and I want to welcome on to the show today, Synaxis Podcast. I'm super excited to have this conversation with these two fine gentlemen. Please introduce yourselves, my friends.
Hey, Mano. Thanks for having us on. This is Jordan.
And I'm Josh.
Awesome. I really appreciate you guys doing this. It's been fun watching a lot of your videos, and I was excited to have a conversation with you guys, being that we kind of have a lot in common. We like the same kind of stuff and all that. So I'm really excited to have this conversation with you gentlemen.
Awesome, right on, man. Yeah, thanks for having us on.
Yeah, thanks for reaching out.
First thing I want to start off with is the characters. Why did you pick Pythagoras, and who's the other guy? Is that supposed to be the metal mystic?
Yeah, exactly. That's the metal mystic. He's actually Mephisto from Faust.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, we chose them kind of out of expedience because we knew we didn't have any kind of visual stuff. We were just making an audio podcast, and we were like, maybe we should try to add a visual element to this. And it was really inspired by what are those guys? Dormant Dynasty?
Iron Age Archive.
Because they do a similar thing with little animated avatar guys.
Right.
Oh, we could probably steal that. And so I chose Mephisto for the Metal Mystic stuff that I was doing, my other channel. So it's I'll just bring that over to kind of make a tie between the two things, since I'm already kind of known by that image anyway. And then I just chose Pythagoras because I liked the aesthetic of that art style. And I threw those Thug Life glasses on him.
Yeah, and I always liked Platonism and some of Pythagorean kind of stuff from back in the day when I was more interested in that explicitly. And he was just like, how about Pythagoras? And I was like, yeah, that sounds great, dude. And yeah, out of expedience, we were quickly trying to come up with characters. And I was like, yeah, dude, looks awesome.
The Pythagoras, yeah, that's a good choice. I was also into him for a while too, until I kind of started getting out of all that stuff,
Yeah, I watched some of your stuff. Yeah, it seemed like you definitely have a similar path, being interested in esotericism. I think you said you're in the Kabbalion and.
Yeah, that was I called it my Bible for a little while. So I was deeply into that stuff.
Yeah, totally. Well, I get it. It's usually shows people who are deeply seeking for the truth in one way or another. A lot of people end up through some path of esotericism. So certainly resonates with me. I get it.
Definitely, yeah. It was an interesting journey for sure, and it seems to be helping as well because I'm able to have a lot of conversations with individuals that are still in that world and make the comparison to Orthodoxy and show the inversion and all that stuff. So it kind of helps.
Yeah, for sure.
So let's start with I want you guys to kind of give a little bit of an overview on the podcast, and of course I'd like to get your stories, but let's start with the podcast. I know I've heard you guys talk about the whole journey to Montanica, and along the way you guys kind of started this conversation. So let everybody know about why you started the show and what the show is about, because I want you guys to explain it, because I really like a lot of the topics you guys touch upon.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's kind of like you said, it was birthed out of this conversation we had on a road trip together, and it's kind of the culmination of our friendship, in which we related to each other on all these different weird niche topics like occultism and philosophy, all this stuff. Conspiracies. We've always been interested in all this stuff, and we just thought it would be cool to have just like a conversation kind of podcast format where we tried to, I guess, I don't know, though my words are failing me right now, but just kind of dissect these things in, like kind of a laid back way. And it would also give us the opportunity to do some research and kind of present our findings in this kind of format. And we're still kind of, I think, becoming whatever it is we are. We just decided to start it and see where it went. So that's kind of where we're at.
Well, I'm really happy you guys did, because a lot of the subject matter you guys are touching upon, you guys do a really good job on research and deep dive. You really cover a lot of, in like an hour episode, you'll kind of cover a lot of ground, and you'll actually go deep in that hour. And I really appreciate that, because I know a lot how much work that takes. So it's commendable, really.
Yeah, that's a nice compliment. Man. Thanks for saying that.
And cool. The editing. Oh my God, the editing is incredible. I'm jealous. I'm not gonna lie. I think Jordan
crushes. Yeah, he crushes his editing, dude.
It's incredible. So I kind of actually wanted to have the conversation in reverse, kind of like usually people start off with their stories. I wanted to kind of start off with like talking about the podcast, and then move into to your stories. So it seems that a lot of your background, both of you, has to do with the occult, as you mentioned, and I think Josh, you have a little bit of experience with Burning Man and all that kind of new agey sort of stuff.
Yeah, for sure.
Let's get into some of that. Let's talk about how did you find your way to Orthodoxy, and like what was it like before you got to Orthodoxy?
I grew up in a kind of, I always explain it, I didn't really have like a background metaphysic. Like you grew up cradle Orthodox. I grew up with like a Protestant grandma who was pretty saintly. Like I don't want to just say she's holy, but she's great, and she's been a big influence on my life. And my dad was like a pro skater in the 80s and was kind of this like rebellious, like listening to punk music. And my mom kind of rebelled against kind of Protestantism until I was 14 or 15, and then got into it. And at that time I was like, this is kind of ridiculous. Like I didn't take it very serious. And, I had a pretty big rebellious phase and moved out and met a bunch of people in my area who were into philosophy, but also pretty into psychedelics and like more along that path. So I definitely had like many years of that, like, psychedelic use, but also being interested in philosophy. And then, it culminated into Burning Man for 6 years straight, and that's a whole lifestyle in itself, for sure.
Absolutely.
So like, if people know, it's not like really a casual thing. Like when you do Burning Man, it usually becomes like the center of your life. Like the people I knew who went to Burning Man, it ends up being like their New Year's, the whole year cycles around planning for Burning Man. And it's usually just, for a lot of people, like a Bacchanalian festival of do whatever you want, and a lot of drug use. But before and kind of during all that, I worked at a Christian camp, a Protestant camp, in the kitchen, where I met Jordan. And I was pretty disagreeable, and I liked to argue, and I would argue with all the Protestants, and they were really sweet, but like, maybe couldn't really keep up. And I would, they were really sweet. I'll say that. They were very kind-hearted. But Jordan was one of the Orthodox people. I think he was the first Orthodox person I met there. And he could kind of keep up. He could argue with me back in a way that I enjoyed. So that's kind of how I got introduced to him. And we really bonded around like conspiracies, and, we were into Alex Jones. It was a lot, it was 10, more than 10 years ago now. So, I was into, I think I was into David Icke a bit. But I was really into Alan Watts and that kind of Alan Watts isn't even a good example of like a perennialist. He's kind of just jumps around to whatever Eastern philosophy he likes at the time, but he's very charismatic. He was fun to listen to. And
definitely. I did a lot of that.
Yeah, for sure. He's a good speaker. He's really fun to listen to. He can say things in a really compelling way.
Absolutely.
So that's kind of how I got introduced to Jordan and Orthodoxy, but I didn't take Orthodoxy seriously until a couple years ago. And right now I'm not even baptized. Like I'm a catechumen right now.
Oh, okay.
But that's kind of how I got introduced to Jordan and to Orthodoxy.
Awesome. How about you, Jordan?
Well, the thought occurred to me because you talked about like occultism and stuff, and I was never officially involved in that, but I was just really immersed in like metal and horror movies and comic books and like all the pop culture stuff that was happening at the time. And I've realized over the years how much is embedded in that, and how like on almost a subconscious level, I was being initiated into this occult mindset.
Yep.
And so I think that's been a big part of our podcast is dissecting all of those things. And I guess I hadn't really thought of it in those terms until you mentioned that, because it was like, I never actually wanted to join any kind of like order or actually do magic. I just had this memory of like in middle school finding a witchcraft book under the bleachers in PE. And I was flipping through it and I noticed that they spelled magic with a K. And I was like, they spelled magic wrong. This is stupid. And I just threw it back where I found it. Yeah. And that was like my own pride somehow saving me from, because I could have easily gotten pulled into the darker places, but I do feel like, God was watching over me and guiding me through all that stuff.
Absolutely.
And other than that, I mean, my parents, both of their parents were very devout Protestants, but they had sort of fallen away, but still kept a certain Christianity. Mm-hmm. And kind of the same with Josh. Like my grandparents were really my sort of introduction to a deep belief in Christ. And that stayed with me. But early in like my teen years, early on, my dad was really struggling with alcoholism, and he ended up discovering an Orthodox bookstore in town, and he started going to the parish. He started reading a whole bunch of like Father Seraphim Rose and all this stuff, and he would bring this stuff home. And after a while, he got baptized, and I saw a huge transformation in him.
Yep.
And that was the start of me. It took years after that, but that was the start of me really being attracted to Orthodoxy. And I still had to go on my journey. And it was really when I took a world religion class at a junior college where I started discovering all these different religious philosophies and then kind of recontextualizing them in Orthodoxy. And that was when I read Christ's Eternal Tao, and that was the book that I credit with like really converting me.
That's a great book.
Yeah, and so I guess that's a basic summary of how I got here.
Well, it seems that Father Seraphim Rose seems to be especially in Canada, the U.S., well, predominantly in the U.S., but I'm also hearing it from Canadians that are kind of finding their way back to Orthodoxy or to Orthodoxy. Mm-hmm. Father Seraphim Rose seems to be, saint of the modern day, you know what I mean? Because especially his connection to Alan Watts, which you mentioned as well, and he's like a perfect bridge to kind of tie it all together and kind of make sense of the things that didn't make sense in the occult new agey sort of world. You know, I'm sure we kind of all faced that, especially being at Burning Man and going through metal music, because I was a little bit more punk than metal, but I definitely grew up with a lot of metalheads. So like I know exactly what you're talking about, the whole Jimmy Page stuff, and I mean,
he lives in Aleister Crowley's house.
Exactly, you know, and I remember even the Ozzy song Crowley, and then singing it along, and then one day,
Mr. Crowley,
then all of a sudden you start realizing who he's talking about, and you're like, wait a minute, and you know, and Sgt. Pepper.
I think that was the first time I ever heard about Aleister Crowley was from that song.
Right. And then, you know, of course, Sgt. Pepper, he's on the cover.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So it's weird how subliminally that those messages get like dropped. You know what I mean? Like almost like it's intentional. You know, and then you don't realize it until you kind of start, singing a song and then going, what are they talking about? And you kind of look into it. But that's why I love talking about Father Seraphim Rose, because it's kind of like the reversal of that. You know, like the deprogramming it.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. It really is.
Yeah, like you said, Seraphim Rose really appealed to me because not only was he a student of Alan Watts, but he was incredibly into Taoism. Yeah. And I did like a form of Chinese Kung Fu when I was younger, just kind of went to do a martial art in the area. And it was one that was like heavily focused on like breathing exercises. And it was kind of implicitly Taoist.
Yep.
So like the idea of yang and yin is like cosmological principles, and like it focused on breath work. So like by the time I was interested in esotericism, like when I looked at a lot of the Western esoteric traditions, they kind of seemed like they were missing a lot, where I felt like a lot of the Taoist stuff was kind of just like, it was implicitly, it had esotericism kind of in it, at least like the martial arts aspect,
Absolutely.
where there was like, it just felt like a more complete version. So I think it was one of the things that made me not too interested in people like Crowley early on, but I was interested in it being like, oh, like this is all probably just like magnetic fields and like prayer and certain things, like, there's just ways to utilize the body and the earth. And like, so I was kind of looking at it from like an Eastern perspective more. But then, Father Seraphim Rose really like elucidated a lot. And I think we always say he's the patron saint of lost Westerners.
Yes. That's a better way of putting it than I put it earlier. Absolutely. That's great.
But so he really appealed to me, and we had like a similar path. And so, he's definitely the coolest.
For sure. And you put it well. Me too. That's kind of what, like, even when I got into all that stuff, it was more like I did some Qigong as well and all that stuff, and looked into Taoism because the Kabbalions kind of like, it's very similar in the concepts and ideas. So that attracted me as well. I was less into like the black magic stuff. Not really interested in that. I'm far more into like the metaphysics behind, the all, as opposed to calling it God, just the all and all this stuff and these concepts of the universe and what they are. So it's kind of interesting how Father Seraphim Rose, after reading a bunch of his work, Nihilism and the Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. By the way, great job with that video, guys. That was amazing.
Oh,
awesome. Thanks, man.
So actually, I've sent that to a few people that started asking me some questions about UFOs and all that. I'm like, nice. Check this one out.
Awesome. Thanks, man.
No, it's a great video. It's a great video. So now I wanted to talk a little bit about some of the research you guys do. Like I said earlier, you guys do a really good job packing a lot in an hour or so. How does that go? How do you guys do that? Like, do you guys split it up? And I also like to feel that it's a conversation when you guys are both talking. So how do you guys do the research, and then how do you present it?
I guess it depends on the kind of topic. Some of the topics we knew a lot about before, we both read a bunch of Seraphim Rose, and like the vampires one, the recent one, was definitely like having to dive more into it because, not very studied on the history of vampires. Mm-hmm. But some of it we'll know before, and some of it will be like, we should learn about this thing. Here are some books, or let's read this, or.
Yeah. And I usually try to base it on like one main sort of like text or piece of media that we could hang everything else on. Mm-hmm. So like the UFOs one you mentioned, we started with a chapter from Charles Upton's book, The Alien Disclosure Deception. And then we used that as a jumping off point into all these different other things we wanted to talk about. It just kind of depends on the subject, like Josh said, but we usually try to take a couple weeks to just kind of follow threads and see where they go. And then we like make a Google Doc, and we throw, all the different things we'd like to cite into that. Then we start organizing it. And usually an episode we'll do like one or two takes on, because we'll listen to the first one and be like, oh, we could have talked about this, or we could have elaborated on that better. And then we'll cut both of the best stuff out of both takes into one episode. And that's kind of how they come together.
Yeah, it's tough because I'm trying to do a lot of that now. So like when I watching your guys' stuff, I was impressed. I was like, okay, these guys have a good handle on how to present things. It's really well done. Sorry to keep mentioning that. It's just like it's impressive. It's good. It's good. So
that's really nice. Yeah.
I wanted to talk about how you guys intertwine Orthodoxy into each episode, and kind of how you give a perspective from an Orthodox perspective, obviously. What was it, while you were doing your exploration in all these different subjects, what was it about Orthodoxy that kind of gave you an entry point to understanding a lot of the stuff? Because that's kind of how it feels from the outside, like watching your guys' videos. It seems like you're kind of tying all these world events or situations, like for example in the Brave New World episode, and then you're finding ways of bringing the whole Orthodox sphere into it and to explain things. What elements of Orthodoxy do you guys find relevant in how you guys put it all together? don't know if that question made sense now that I'm thinking about it.
No, I think it did. I mean, the first thing that comes to mind for me is like spiritual warfare on an individual level. Mm-hmm. Like, because Christ's Eternal Tao, like I said, was the book that converted me, and that was the first time I was exposed to this idea that you can, that you are not your thoughts, and you can recognize when a thought is harmful, and you can banish it and not accept it, or like a desire or something. You like the watchfulness of the Holy Fathers, which is something, I mean, obviously we're all called to struggle with, and it's not something I'm necessarily great at, but it's something that I guess I've been thinking about a lot. And so taking that from an individual level and kind of applying it to like this sort of macro pop culture level, and seeing how these influences can start creeping in and start kind of manipulating the way people think. I think there's something there in the way we treat it with Orthodoxy. But what about you?
I mean, there's no perspectives from nowhere, you know? So I think that Orthodoxy is true. So that's the easiest to come. And it's like, having studied a lot of other worldviews, Orthodoxy really equips you with like not just like presuppositional apologetics, but it gives you a frame to come at things with that's coherent and internally consistent and maps onto the world. Where like, having done the Burning Man thing, I've kind of had a lot of different worldviews at different times. So I can kind of in my head quickly look at things from different perspectives, or like past worldviews. And Orthodoxy just bullies the rest of the worldviews straight up.
That's a good way of putting it, for sure. No, I could totally relate with how you just put that. I can. It wasn't. So I was born in the Greek Orthodox and all that stuff, but it took me a while to get back to it. But then when I started looking at a lot of the things I was really into in the quote unquote occult world, like the concept of the third eye and energy and all that stuff, and then you start applying it to like the concept of nous from the Orthodox perspective, and logos spermatica. Like, I've had direct experiences where I'm writing songs, older songs, where I went back and like looked at a couple of them, and I was like, oh man, I'm writing about all this like occultism and all this stuff. And then I started reading the lyrics and started realizing logos spermatica was present, because all I had to do was change a couple words, and it was literally like an Orthodox song. And that's that was a moment for me where I kind of stood back and I went through a lot of my lyrics, and I'm like, no, it's present here. So I like how you guys put that, because I think you said in one of your episodes, having Orthodox as a worldview, it kind of changes how you look at things, like whether it's aliens or nous or energy or all of these concepts. It changes your perspective. It doesn't mean that they're not real. Like, so a lot of people that are, when they get into the Christian world, they're like, oh, that magic stuff isn't real. And from an Orthodox perspective, no, it's real. And that's half of the problem, is that it works. But we have a different explanation and a different inverted view of it.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it puts everything in its proper place. Like
it does.
Yeah, everything's in the right context. I think I would argue, like within Orthodoxy, like Josh was saying, it provides the framework, and you have to recontextualize all these things that may not even seem like they're related, but they do fit in. Absolutely.
You guys also touch a lot on perennialism, and that's definitely something I want to have you guys back on at some point, so we can go a little bit deeper. But I think it's an important subject, especially in the world that we live in today, being how everything's kind of melting together and it's losing its meaning. That seems to be a theme that kind of flows through all your episodes, and I think you've even mentioned it a couple times that you guys have to do an episode on perennialism.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to.
I'm insisting on it. So, at what point did that kind of come into your worldview, the understanding of perennialism, like seeing it and like applying it like into like how you interpret pop culture? Because that's kind of what you guys are doing, is like looking at pop culture from that perspective.
Yeah, well, for me, it started with a book by Charles Upton called System of Antichrist. Are you familiar with that author at all?
I am, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, so I discovered him probably 2 or 3 years after I was baptized. And when I read that book particularly, it almost felt like like a weird sequel to Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future,
Right.
but it was with a completely different, not a totally different perspective, but like what felt to me as like a wider perspective at the time, because he is a student of like the traditionalist perennialists, which I guess you have to make a distinction between them and like just general perennialism and like New Age sort of religious pluralism, because they're a lot more rigorous and they do put up boundaries. And for a while I was really receptive to that, and I really wanted to believe in it because there were certain things in that book that seemed to make sense to me, and that at the time didn't really undermine orthodoxy. They actually seemed to champion orthodoxy as true. But then, after years of kind of wrestling with this stuff, I realized that it really does end up undermining the incarnation of Christ and everything that makes orthodoxy what it is. And so, yeah, it definitely needs its own episode, because that entire journey that I just described is, it would take a lot to unpack that. But
Of course.
And I think that Jordan's the one that got me into Charles Upton and Rene Guénon from back in the day. But before that, my experience with perennialists were through, I did ayahuasca in ceremony a couple times, and it was in like an invite-only circle of people who would term themselves as perennialists. There were some of them were Buddhists, and so it was kind of through like real-world interaction of people who had different traditions, but they would come together and be like, look at the commonalities between these things. There's some kind of esoteric truth or like inner truth to all these exoteric shells of religion. There's all these different forms that it takes, but really they're all kind of saying the same thing. So I had like in-person experience with people like that before I got into Upton and Guénon, who talk about it, I think, more coherently.
Yeah, that does definitely seem to be prevalent in that world, and I experienced the same thing. Even if you go as far back as like Madame Blavatsky and the Theosophical Society, you could see that they're already trying to do that and kind of combine all these religions and kind of say that they're all, we're all just kind of looking at the elephant from a different perspective, and all that. But it was funny because I was listening to someone talk, and the one common thread that you find amongst all religions, they always mention Christ. And they always like say, he was a pretty important person, but he was just some guy or whatever.
Right.
But
or he's like a Buddha of the West,
exactly. But you don't find that from the Orthodox perspective. We don't go around saying like, Buddha was cool, this guy was cool. So it's cool that they all accept Jesus as a cool guy. You know what I'm saying? From their perspective, you know what I mean? So that kind of gives us some credit and clout, I think, to some degree. Like everyone kind of knows there was something about this individual. You know what I mean?
Yeah, a lot of them will just, especially like the Theosophist and the Occultist, they'll just reframe him as, like an enlightened one. Like now he's an ascended master. And it leads to that just like, he's just one of the dudes who had the spiritual truth of what is like a perennialism, who now is one with Buddha and all that. But, it takes the core of orthodoxy and kind of like perverts it into he's just another good guy, dude. It's one of those things. Yeah,
and then now they're going as far as like saying that he was an alien. Linda Moulton Howe, I remember hearing her say that back in the day, and I was like, what are you talking about, an alien? Like,
yeah, dude, the alien stuff online gets pretty, that's another thing, being into conspiracy stuff back in the day and feeling like you're learning all this stuff. Like I remember watching the Disclosure Project in 2010, and it was funded by like one of the Rockefellers, and some of that stuff was really interesting, and being part of a mainstream society that's like, all that alien stuff's ridiculous. And then feeling like you're really figuring stuff out, like kind of leads you onto a path where you end up ultimately deceived, but you feel like you're figuring the thing out. There's this thread of truth through all of it, and it ends up totally deceiving you.
So true. And like they planned it that way. That's like I was reading a lot. I've been going through the Tavistock Institute, a lot of the a couple of different books, and like going through the actual source material. And it's funny because when you read a book like that, and then you go to the source material and you just see the actual individuals saying that, hey, we're going to do this. We're going to like create this. Like it's almost like what's that thing parents do where they I'm blanking out. Where they reverse, not the good reverse psychology. It's kind of like the intellectual version of reverse psychology. Like, don't look over here because that kind of situation, you start, like you said, you start digging into like the because I got into like the UFO stuff back in the day, like with Richard Dolan's and a few other key individuals, and I was like, oh my god, I'm on to something, I'm figuring this all, I'm such a detective, I'm so smart.
Yeah, I was totally right there. I was like, dude, I'm figuring this out.
Yeah, totally. And then I go back and I look at some of the footage, like the Stephen Greer stuff with the Disclosure Project from the beginning. I'm like, how did I not see this? All these Malakis, man, they're clearly like spooks, you know what I'm saying? It's ridiculous.
Then they're usually like obviously attached to intelligence agencies, and not even in like a crazy way. They're just like, I'm a CIA agent and I'm retired now, and it's like, oh yeah, I'm sure you're telling the truth.
Every time. What's that Canadian guy, Paul Hellyer, I think his name is? He was like a high Canadian defense minister. He was like one of the very first high officials to start. I think he's Paul Hellyer. I can't remember his name. But
is that the guy that was? I remember seeing like a Canadian Parliament video of a guy being like,
"That's him."
He was talking about like the aliens came and said that the climate change is going to destroy the Earth, and they want to protect us from that, or something like that.
Yeah, and it's always some sort of like big global problem we have to solve. We could always only solve it if we all kind of come together in a one world government scenario.
Yeah, global problems have global solutions.
Yeah. Every time, like Ronald Reagan's speech is like pretty telling, and what a world, man! What a time to be alive.
Yeah,
it's funny because like now that you guys brought that up, it kind of brings back so many memories of being young and like figuring all this stuff, thinking I'm figuring all this stuff out, and like I got one, like I figured this all out, and like running out to my friends, I'm like, did you know about this? Reverse engineering, the technology is crazy.
Yeah. It's because the official narratives always seem ridiculous. Stuff like Roswell, it's like, dude, it's just a weather balloon. So like anyone who's kind of curious and is like, really, was it just a weather balloon? Like the newspaper said it wasn't, it was a saucer. So like it really makes you feel like you're on this thread of truth and just these other people don't see it. And it like appeals to people who are curious and intelligent and, disagreeable and are already distrusting of authorities. So Absolutely. It really does a way of, it's like a reverse psychology where it's like, it's definitely not what it seems to be, guys. And then you get led to this ridiculous path that leads 100 places and nowhere at the same time.
Every time. It's always the same. And I remember I'm going to probably put out the episode soon. I was kind of doing a little bit of a deep dive into like, what was that? The one that Orson Welles faked the
War of the Worlds.
War of the Worlds, yeah. So I was doing like all of like the background info on that and how the Rockefellers were involved with it and the Princeton radio project and all that stuff. And it's the same story. And it's always like this experiment. Like, will people buy it? Will they believe it? And then they start, and then you start, 2020, 9/11, all these situations, you kind of see the same rule book being like, they're just reading out of the same playbook, you know what I mean? And they're just doing the same sort of situations. And going back to that story, it's literally the exact same thing as Y2K, 9/11, 2020, all of the SARS, the whole SARS thing back in the day, because I was in Toronto when that happened, and it hit Toronto big. Oh man, it's such a weird world that we live in, and so many crazy things people believe. I don't know. Like me as well. Like the things I bought into, I can't believe it sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. What is that? A cultural shock or whatever, like the Tavistock.
The shock troops, they were out there to kind of, Future Shock was Alan, I forgot his name now. I have his book around here too. Like, so like, it's weird because like, you could just see their play. If you just kind of go back and you like read all their Alan Toffler, that's the name. He wrote Future Shock. It's just strange, and it's weird to kind of look at it from an Orthodox perspective, going back to that. Like now that I'm kind of going a little bit deeper into like the metaphysics within the Orthodox faith, and realizing how much mysticism is a big part of it, and how a lot of these things are explained from a different perspective. I think you guys also mentioned it when you guys were talking with the Collins brothers about UFOs, and then how the ancient description of demons pretty much it paints the same picture, and Father Seraphim writes about that as well.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I wanted to kind of move towards music a little bit, because I'm a musician as well. So you, on Metal Mystic, so you did one on Dio, and so what do you got? You have any more coming up? You got Richie Blackmore?
Yeah, I've had one in the works for a while, and it's been hard to balance. I've been I don't want to say distracted, but I've been more focused, I guess, on Synaxis Podcast. And I also have a full-time job. So I'm trying to learn how to juggle all this stuff. But I've been working on a sequel to the Dio one, because as I was working on the first one, it became pretty blatant to me obviously how into the occult he is, but like thinking about a lot of his other material and how Gnosticism is really woven into all of his lyrical themes and stuff. So that's one I've been working on that should hopefully come out soon. I need time to focus on it though, because I've been reading a lot of books about it. Like I feel like I need to get a better grasp of Gnosticism, and it's such a wide ranging, I don't want to call it a belief system. It's like more than that. It's weird. It's this weird, like winding thing. So I've been trying to get my mind around that, and so that I could present it in like a pretty authentic way. And that's kind of what has been taking so long, because I just have this stack of books I'm trying to work through, but that should hopefully come out soon. And I have plans for other stuff after that. One that I really want to look at is Bruce Dickinson's solo album, Chemical Wedding.
Yeah.
Because that has a lot of like William Blake and Aleister Crowley influence in that. So
big time. Wasn't he?
But yeah, that takes a lot of research and editing. So it's going to be a little bit, but hopefully it comes out soon.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no, I understand the research end of it. Sometimes you get stuck in that research phase and you don't put things out. That's where I'm at. I'm trying to get stuff out. And yeah, you're right. Gnosticism is a massive one, especially like which Gnosticism you're looking at too.
Yeah.
It's evolved quite a bit.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's creepy in a lot of ways.
For sure.
It's super creepy. But you ever thought of doing one on G.G. Allen?
No, that's actually not one that has come up, but I could throw it on the list for sure. I wasn't super into him. I know of him, but I don't know a whole lot. I just know he's kind of a weird, gross guy. That's really
I wasn't into him either. That wasn't, but it just the way his I'm more into his story than anything to do with his music, just because it was such a strange. It reminded me a lot of Charles Manson, that kind of like psychology behind it. Like he was born as Jesus Christ. His father named him Jesus Christ. But anyways, and he.
I don't even think I've heard of this guy. Interesting.
He's like a crazy, weird punk dude. He's gnarly, man. If you look him up, you'll know exactly what I mean. Like pretty gnarly dude. It's weird because like even the punk world. It had like what we were talking about with Father Turbo, the perspective from the punk, like especially that time period, the late 70s, 80s. It was kind of like the opposite of the metal world in a lot of ways. So, coming out of that sort of scene, not that I was a teenager at that time, but I mean, like a lot of that 70s and early 80s punk really influenced me. It was kind of more of like the rebellious nature of questioning and pushing back. And I had a lot of metal friends who were into a lot of the stuff that you've referenced. And I remember us having like these debates and arguments. And I remember bringing that up when I was a kid. I'm like, you guys are just always about like this pretend Satanism and all that stuff. And you're not talking about anything. And they're like, what do you mean? We're doing black magic.
Yeah.
It's so ridiculous. Oh my God. What a world. What a world.
Yeah, it's crazy how that kind of like Satanism has inundated so many subcultures. Like someone who grew up skateboarding, it's like that too. Like the amount of skate companies that have like explicitly satanic logos, like more than just like Thrasher and stuff. Like it always surprises me. I'll go into a skate shop and be like, whoa, is everything like this now?
Mm-hmm. It's changed a lot. When were you into skating and punk?
I mean, I grew up skateboarding because my dad's a skateboarder and my dad still skateboards. And,
that's awesome.
And I kind of stopped for the longest time, and I got into rock climbing and other kinds of like exercise. And like in the last like year, I started skateboarding again. So I'm skating, and that's why I'll end up in skate shops and I'll look around at the decks and stuff. I'd be like, whoa, like those are sigils all over these boards. Like that's not good at all. Like,
Yeah.
Yeah,
it's crazy how they try to seed all that into like to get into your subconscious, and you don't really notice it, until like you read one of these books or watch one of your podcasts. It's weird, man. It's weird. It's everywhere. It's everywhere. So to go back to Orthodoxy, I know we're jumping around all over the place because I kind of like that this time around.
Yeah.
So what was it about Orthodoxy that kind of pulled you guys towards that version of Christ rather than like the Protestant version or the Catholic version? Like, what was it specifically about the Orthodox faith that kind of pulled you guys? Because I mentioned it with my interview with Father Turbo when I first started seeing non-Greeks, non-Russians, non-Serbians kind of starting to talk more about Eastern Orthodoxy. It struck me as odd. Like, I was like, this is weird. Like, I think one of the first guys I heard was James Perloff and Jay Dyer, and that was like 2014, and I was confused. I'm like, these guys aren't Greek, Russian, whatever. How does it, it just, because growing up in Toronto, no one knew what that meant. They say, if you said I'm Greek Orthodox, they're like, what do you mean? What does that mean? Like, you're like some weird Catholic. So, that always kind of struck me as an interesting thing to discuss. So, like, what was it about Orthodoxy that kind of pulled you guys?
Well, for me, I think it's a weird combination of Orthodoxy being very practical and grounded, but also super cosmic and like overwhelming. I don't know how to put it, but because like I said, I had certain influences in my life growing up, like my grandparents who were very, very Protestant, and they were really devout, and they loved Jesus, and they taught me, like, I remember one of my earliest memories is my grandma teaching me to sing This Little Light of Mine, and that's stuck with me for a long time. But I remember my dad trying to take us to all these different sort of like rock band churches in the area, and I don't know, I literally would sit in the back and have like an earbud in, listening to Merciful Fate while they're playing worship music and stuff like that. Because like, I don't know, I was an angsty teenager and I wanted to believe in Jesus, but everything seemed so fake. And I didn't really know how to square it, and I didn't really know where to put that desire to believe in God until like I started. Like I said, I took that world religion class, and every section, like learning about Hinduism and Buddhism and the ways they thought about like desire, and how like our desires destroy us and we have to be free of them. Like that really changed the way I thought about the idea of sin and stuff like that. And then, we got into the Taoism section. Right. And that was when I thought about, oh wait, my dad had that book, Christ's Eternal Tao. And then I read that, and it just seemed to tie everything together. It was like this really lucid, intelligent, but also like mystical. It was just the whole package. And like, it just hit me in the face when I read that. And that started the ball rolling, I guess you could say.
I'd say Christ the Eternal Tao is a big part for me too. That book really wrapped up a lot for me and made me incredibly interested in Orthodoxy. And also, finding Jay Dyer online. I was really into like the ANCAP, like anarcho-capitalist, super libertarian for a long time, big Molyneux fan. And watching Jay Dyer kind of bully Molyneux in a debate about like abstract objects, like the existence of numbers and how you ground certain things, like it made me realize that Orthodoxy can really defend the kinds of things that I'd always been passionate about. Because a lot of my interactions with Protestants was them being very kind-hearted and sweet and definitely better people than me for a lot of the time, but couldn't really defend the kinds of things intellectually in the way that I wanted to. So it always made me lean towards something like perennialism, where I'm like, oh, I can just look at this as like the skeleton. I had something to defend when I was talking about perennialism. And then seeing Jay Dyer like really use like the presuppositional apologetics against other worldviews, like it made me incredibly interested. That and the church fathers liked to debate, so it wasn't just a like, believe me kind of thing. And it really made me quite interested in it. So it drew me a lot. And then Christ, because I was a Taoist for so long, that Christ the Eternal Tao like really pushed me in the direction of being like, it's Orthodoxy. And it also just seems like so much more full of a worldview, where like a lot of Protestantism would be like an intellectual thing. It's an accepting of an idea. It's like, well, Jesus is part of the Trinity and you put him in your heart. It just seemed like like kind of like an intellectual thing and not so much of a lived out.
A little bit more abstract. Maybe.
Yeah, it was more abstract. And not to say that there aren't Protestants who have like an embodied kind of faith, but in Orthodoxy, it really embodies the kind of faith and tradition that appeals to me. And the older I get, the more I kind of had like a disdain for modernity. So like a lot of the modern stuff I don't really like. Like I'm pretty opposed to much of what's going on in modernity. And Orthodoxy is such a stronghold against all the stuff where I'd see, like rock band Protestant church is not the kind of thing that I want to be engaged in. You know, so then going to liturgy and seeing the colors and the censers with frankincense and more, like it engages all of your senses in a way that like really spoke to me. It just seems so much more full of a worldview than other kinds of Christianity I'd encounter. So.
Yeah, I fully agree. Also, like going to like the incense and all that, and the senses, it just brought to mind the first couple times where I kind of started putting together like a lot of the stuff in the New Age, where there's like fractal patterns and you know, incense and all that stuff, and like phi ratio and all that. You still see those present. You still see it present. It's part of our churches, right? So it's not like you have to walk away from those things. You just have to reinterpret what they mean and kind of go closer to the source.
Yeah, a huge part of that's one of the things I noticed at Burning Man is so many people were like fed up with the kind of like modernity and materialism. Like everyone's just wearing sweatshirts that they're just like, well, this is sacred geometry. You know, they have like platonic kind of shapes and like just mathematical ratios and phi everywhere. And like that always appealed to me. They're talking about cymatics and how vibration creates certain patterns that are predictable. And like that really appealed to me for a long time. And yeah, through Orthodoxy, you don't have to throw that kind of thing away. Yeah, totally. Yeah. I think I have that book.
The Unveiled Melchizedek. This guy,
totally.
No,
you're right. A lot of, So it lets you like, it lets you keep a lot of those things and just put them in their right place. You know, I don't have to throw out the fact that math and ratios and, you know, that stuff is a real thing, you know, where I feel like, there was a tendency in other kinds of Christianity that I had encountered to try to look at all that stuff and be like, it's New Age. She'd be like, no, dude, God made the patterns. It is cool that there's ratios and patterns and that fractals and, you know, like, especially doing hallucinogens, like a lot of people end up seeing fractals and it's something that sticks with them. And they're like, wow, there's something to this that I can't really explain. Yep. So Orthodoxy just puts it in its right place.
That's so true. I think the last psychedelic experience I had was in 2019. I started off with 7 grams of mushrooms, and I think by the end of the night I was 14.
Going hard, yeah.
Oh man, it was intense, and I will never forget that experience. But now looking back at that experience from this perspective, something didn't feel right about it. Like it wasn't a bad experience. I can't say like it was a very interesting trip. It was a good trip, but now looking back, I could realize why it felt kind of dirty. I don't know. Like some people ask me, like, what's the difference with like when you pray now and you're participating in Orthodox ritual? What's the difference? I'd say in some cases it feels somewhat similar. Not that it feels like psychedelics, but I mean like the overall understanding of what's going on around you. But I just have a different understanding of what up is and what down is. You know, kind of like the analogy I use is like whether the world is flat, whether the world is round. That's not the debate point. The point is, if you point up in both scenarios, up means something totally different. If you're on a flat earth, up and down mean one thing. And if you're on a round globe, up and down means something totally different. But both are up and down. It kind of feels like, I don't know if that makes sense, but just like changing my perspective of psychedelics or like my experience on psychedelics and cymatics and all these things that you referenced. It's weird because when I'm looking at it from an Orthodox perspective now, it feels more like, first of all, it clicks, it makes sense. It has more meaning rather than less meaning, and it's less what's the word I'm looking for? Less abstract. It has more of like a definitive truth to it, where you can see the architect and you're worshiping the creator rather than worshiping the creation. And I always find that annoying. Even when I was really into it, everyone was worshiping the creation and never really questioning who's making all this happen, you know? And I don't know, I went off on a tangent.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. That or there's even a more pernicious kind of thing that goes through all the psychedelic stuff where people will realize that, you know, that there's the creation, but then they'll have a I'm the creator kind of pantheistic kind of thing where it's like, I actually make these patterns. And it's all, you know, so it leads to like a a dark, weird narcissism where you're the whole, you know, and usually it's some form of like Advaita Vedanta, kind of out of context, where it's, you know, the big soul is the little soul, and I'm the cosmic soul, and I'm really what's doing this. And it leads to people, I mean, I saw it a lot at Burning Man. People would live like narcissistic lives, really devoid of any kind of coherent ethic, but it was cool because they're God. And if they harm someone, it's really just them from another perspective. And that I really did not like.
That's so true. That's so true. It's like a self-deification, you're worshiping of the self.
Absolutely.
It's like solipsism at its highest.
Yeah.
Which is interesting because solipsism is one of the commandments of like the Satanic Church. It's one of their high principles. And it's kind of funny when you look at that and you kind of invert their, if you take those Satanic commandments and you kind of look at what's going on, it's very New Age, very New Age.
Absolutely.
Like, I create my own reality. I'm so important.
Yeah.
It's I wanted to ask you guys a couple last questions. So what do you guys have coming down the pipeline as far as the podcast Synaxis? Like, what do you guys got coming up?
Well, we are preparing for like a sort of holiday special. We want to talk about Charles Dickens' Christmas Carol, and kind of follow some threads, sort of like we did with Dracula, like try to put it in sort of an Orthodox lens, because I mean, Dickens was one author that Father Seraphim Rose recommended a lot, especially to like catechumens and stuff, to start recontextualizing them into like an Orthodox ethos. He thought that Dickens was a good introduction to that. So that's one of the reasons why I wanted to do it. And we just wanted to do something Christmassy for the holiday season. And then another thing we're ramping up towards is an episode on Romanian prison camps and the re-education experiments that happened there. And that one's going to be a heavy one, but it'll be good. So. Oh yeah, I'm definitely interested in that. I want to hear all about that. Definitely. That's incredible.
That one's heavy and sad, but it's good for people to know about, because it was such a recent kind of thing that like most people are pretty unaware of.
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
How did you guys get introduced to that subject, first of all?
Well, Father George Calciu was actually before I was around at my parish. Can you hear me?
Yeah, now I can hear you. Yeah.
Okay, cool. Yeah, so Father George Calciu was, you know who Father George Calciu is, right? He was one of the priests that went through.
I do.
He was actually arrested twice. But he came to America, and he had a relationship with the priests at our parish, and he's a very highly respected figure there. And I read the first edition of his book, which is called Christ is Calling You, pretty early on, because they had that at the bookstore, and everybody recommended that to me. And it's just so powerful, like the depths of darkness that he had to go through, and the providence of God that he experienced there. And it's just like this super uplifting story in the most inhuman circumstances. So that's really what appeals to me about that. And it just shows like the light of Christ shining in darkness. That's really, I think. Absolutely.
Like, so sorry?
I don't know. Go ahead.
Oh, so sorry, because it keeps clipping out. I'm sorry. My internet's all over the place. That's one thing about Mexico is, this happens a lot. So that's like, I'm really looking forward to hearing about that, because I heard you guys talking about it recently, and I was kind of hoping you guys would be putting that out sometime soon, because it also fits in with a lot of the stuff I'm kind of working on for the future. So I'm definitely going to ask you guys to come back on and talk all about that, because I think it's a very important story, and it shows a lot about the human condition, and it also shows what the dark side can do and what they're capable of and why they're doing it.
Yeah, exactly.
So my last question before I let you guys go is what podcasts do you guys listen to in terms of, it doesn't have to just be Orthodox stuff, but of course a few Orthodox podcasts or just anything in general?
Sure. Well, for me, lately I've been listening to a lot of PsyOp Cinema is really good. Who else? William Ramsey, I like a lot.
Oh yeah, awesome.
Yeah, he's really cool. I mean, obviously, like Jay Dyer and Church of the Eternal Logos.
Those are going to be the first two I said for sure.
David Patrick. Yeah,
he's great.
For sure. Stuff like that. I think that's awesome. A good sampling.
Yeah, I pretty much the same. Yeah, I don't listen to too much psyop cinema, but I should. I know that they're pretty good. But yeah, a lot of Jay Dyer, a lot of Church of the Eternal Logos. I think that's mostly what I listen to now.
Cloud of Witnesses.
Cloud of Witnesses is the new one. Yeah. But if you've checked that out, it's really good.
I have actually, because of you guys posted it even before you had him on, and I was like, oh, what's going on with this? And that was good concept, great guys, and I really liked it. I liked the interview you guys did as well. It was awesome.
Oh yeah, thanks. Yeah, that was really cool.
Jonathan Pajot was really good.
Of course. Yeah, I've been listening to a lot of Orthodox ethos recently.
Nice.
Father Peter's here's like, man, I like everything you guys mentioned. Same thing, but I go through like these weird phases where I'll just listen to one podcast for a couple of weeks and then I'll kind of flip and go around.
Yeah,
so it's kind of. It's also interesting because a few of my friends have, since I started posting about all this stuff, they started asking, like, oh, what should I check out? And they're like, there's this whole world. And they started freaking out. There's this entire Orthodox thing going on. I was like, yeah, I know, man. Check it out. So it's funny because once you hit a couple of podcasts, it explodes into this weird world where you don't even know it exists. And it's crazy.
Yeah. You're like almost crazy. Overwhelmed with the amount of good content.
Yes. Oh, and I've been posting a lot of the Death to the World stuff because,
Death to the World
Punk's background. Oh my God!
Yeah, there's a new YouTube. There's a YouTube channel, Harmony. I don't know if you've seen that. Dude, you have to check it out. It's really good. They did like a Death to the World. I'm pretty sure if you type in Death to the World, it's one of the first things that pops up.
Yeah, they made like a video presentation of the first issue of Death to the World.
I have seen that. I just didn't realize
cool.
that. It's
that channel though. They did another one. They did one of the maybe two of the chapters of God's revelation to the human heart. Seraphim Rose. And it's all, and the editing is really good. It's everything about it is like phenomenal. It just the video like making and audio. Yeah, you have to check it out. It's really good.
I will. That's awesome. No, because that's it's key because like when people see those images, they don't. It's like it changes their perspective of what they think Christianity is. Like I remember someone sending me a message like, "Who are these wizards holding skulls?"
I know, it's so cool. I know, it's funny. It's when I worked at the Christian camp back in the day when I met Jordan. I remember there were some other people who were Orthodox there, and it was like at a time when I was really arguing with all the Protestants, and I remember meeting one of the guys in the kitchen and being like, "Are you Christian?" And he was like, yeah, but it's not what you think it is. Like, and that was just, that always stuck with me where he was like almost reticent to say yeah, because he knew I was going to think of it as like way different from what it, from traditional Orthodoxy. So that always stuck with me.
Yeah, and I did want to say Death to the World was huge for me early on too. It was like, when I was talking to the priests, they were like, oh, you like metal? Maybe you'll like this. So that definitely appealed to me. That whole punk aesthetic is
for sure
so good.
Yeah, and that also seems like there's like these little small camps within the Orthodox universe where like there's like all the punks on one side. You have like Father Turbo and the Royal Path. Then you have all like the Death to the World guys and Buck Johnson, of course. You have all these because I love Buck, of course. He's one of my favorites. Counterflow, man. I love him. And then when they're talking about punk bands, I think that was one of the first times I was like, what? Father Turbo's talking about like the Cro-Mags, and I was like, what? That threw me for a loop, and they started naming all these punk bands. I'm like, I grew up with this. What the hell's going on here? Oh, sorry. So it's weird. It's such a strange world when friends of mine or like old punks, they're like asking about it, and it's the same thing like you said. Like when you said, "Oh, are you Christian?" You're like, "Yeah, but." Not the clean, that kind of thing that you went on. Like there's this whole other like realistic dark underbelly where it's just real. It's real. It's not. It's not Ned Flanders. It's not like
cookie cutter like social media kinds of Christianity. Yeah, there's something about it that's like gritty and raw, and I think it appeals to people, especially in the punk and like metal kind of aesthetic.
Absolutely, and I even hear. In Mexico, I've had a few people asking me a lot of questions Some people in the new age, they're kind of rethinking that. One person in particular I'm thinking about, she's like veered away from that and started asking about Orthodoxy. And I was like, and I try not to push anything on anyone. I just kind of like say, well, here's some entry points, and then just let them, kind of figure it out themselves. But I remember seeing it in her face when she started to realize it's not easy. It's not like there's like work to be done, and it's something that you have to constantly kind of keep at. And it kind of like, it separates those individuals that maybe aren't ready to go deep. I don't know if I'm saying that in a nice way. I'm trying to be polite about it, but it's not for everyone. It's definitely not for everyone. All right, gentlemen. Thank you guys so much for coming on the show, and I really appreciate this conversation. And I don't get a chance to have too many, so doing an episode like this is fantastic. I'm going to be doing a lot more. But please plug everything and anything you're doing. Everybody needs to check out your channel. It is fantastic. I'm not just saying that it's fantastic. So please plug away. Please, please, please.
Oh man, that's so nice of you to say. Yeah, and thanks for having us on. This was awesome.
It was a good conversation. You're a likable dude. Easy to talk to.
Thanks. Thanks.
So yeah, mostly we just have the YouTube channel right now, Synaxis Podcast. That's where you can find pretty much everything. We're hoping to branch out to other stuff sometime, but that hasn't happened yet. So I guess that's just primarily where you'll find us. We also have an Instagram page and a Twitter page as well.
Yeah.
I'll definitely plug that in.
Oh yeah,
your merch. Before you go,
we do have a merch page. Merch. Yeah, I always forget to push the merch. Thank you for reminding me. We can put a link to that too. It's just a Teespring link. JG's Classic Tees is a cool little t-shirt shop that is carrying some of our designs, Synaxis designs, Metal Mystic, and some other stuff. You can check them out. We'll see if we can get like a coupon code going for listeners or whatever.
Definitely.
I also have the Metal Mystic channel, which should hopefully get updated sometime soon. I'm keeping people on waiting there, but yeah.
It'll be worth the wait.
Awesome.
Mystic Metal is great. Definitely check it out if you haven't. It's really high quality videos. It's great.
What about you, Josh? You gonna spring off and do your own like channel too?
Probably not. I just got married. I'm busy with other stuff. Yeah, it's like
we could do a married podcast about like being Orthodox and being married.
That's a good point. Yeah, it's not a bad move actually. Maybe I'll think about it.
Yeah. Well, guys, I really do appreciate that. I'll make sure that I include all your links and all that stuff, and make sure that I get the word out there. And I look forward to having you guys back on. I'm assuming you're gonna do this again because I'm gonna insist.
Awesome. Yeah, we'd love to, man.
Awesome. All right, gentlemen. Goodbye.
Awesome, man. Yeah, thanks for having us on,
God
man.
bless.
God bless. Have a good day, man.
Absolutely. God bless, brothers.